So I'm going to introduce you first to a program that I used to run in Atlanta called Art Explorers Club. And this was when I left grad school. I moved to Atlanta, and I lived there for 6 years. And for almost 4 years, I ran this program. And it was in partnership with the High Museum of Art, which is the major art museum in Atlanta, and the Boys and Girls Clubs of Metro Atlanta. And the national headquarters for the Boys and Girls Clubs are in Atlanta. So anything that worked in the clubs, and if it was successful, they would then implement it into the clubs nationwide. So it's really exciting, this project program. And so what I did was I worked with the kids after school, and you can see me. And I worked first in one pilot club, and then we branched out into the different clubs. And it was arts integration. And so what I was doing was I was teaching well, not so much arts integration, but like art tied into the museum. So I would bring in visiting artists. So here I'm doing a ceramic project. We did face jugs. And sometimes we did drawing projects, and sometimes I would bring in guest artists. So down here, this gentleman is Saw Gauja. Saw has now gone on to become a big Broadway star. He was the lead in the play Fela, which was a big Broadway show. Yeah, so it's kind of cool. So we did this project, and I worked with the kids. And then what also happened was the program was designed so that the kids would go to the High Museum, and they would learn about the permanent collection. So we toured. So the kids would go in. So here you see, this middle school student giving a tour to the public and talking about these complicated pieces of art. And I will say one of my sort of personal favorite moments was talking to this young woman here, and I was asking her about art and what her favorite piece was. She's like, I really like installation, and I like this Kiki Smith piece. And she's going on, and she's describing it, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, this 12-year-old girl is telling me her favorite thing is by Kiki Smith, and it's installation. And I'm hoping some of you guys know who Kiki Smith is, and I'm sure you know about installation. But it was like this really profound moment. And then the High would actually show the kids' work at the end of the year. So here's this program and this connection with the community. And I used to, at the same time I was working in this program, I was also coaching soccer in the Boys and Girls Clubs. So this will lead me to this. It was my first large-scale collaboration in Atlanta. And it was called On the Line. And On the Line sort of came about in a really odd way, and it's going to tie into my next series of work. So this was right after Columbine, and there was a young boy that I was coaching who was murdered. He was killed by another kid. And it was a case of mistaken identity. But because this happened right after Columbine, all of a sudden the press was all over it. And it was very interesting to me because prior to that, nobody pays any attention to the Boys and Girls Club kids. Frankly, no one pays attention to poor kids in communities. So I went to the service, and we had Martin Luther King III was speaking, and all these television cameras were there. And I'm thinking, what happens after this is over? What happens when people walk away, right? And who helps these kids then? And one of the conversations that came up in the eulogy was how this boy was such a great basketball player. He could have been professional. He could have been all these things. And I just was really struck with the fact that he was a stereotype even in his death. No one said he could have been a great father. Nobody said he could have been a great husband or a great uncle or, anything other than a basketball player. So that sort of prompted me to take on basketball in a way. So this piece is about stereotypes and as they affect the African American community in relation to basketball. So it's also a celebration of the love of the game, but it is a commentary on that. And I worked with nine young people, boys and girls, and we took over this whole gallery, and we actually had, we had everything going on. So this bottom half of the gallery, we made a basketball court. So on the floor it's tar paper, and we have all these golden eggs, golden basketballs, and all of them were filled with cement, except for one. So of course the kids would come into the gallery and they, it's just like oh my God, there's a basketball court, they come running down. And this was exactly what I hoped. They'd go and they'd look around and they'd start picking them up. And they'd find the one, and then they start playing basketball. So all of a sudden the space becomes very alive, and they sort of are living out the finding the one ball, the stereotype of finding your escape, your means of leaving poverty behind. And this is also a little bit of an indirect homage to David Hammond's, whereas on the back wall there we have basketball marks pressed against the white, creating this illusion of a target. The second level of the space was a mural where you have these two images. So one side is a police car with a guy, sort of a body outline, and then the echo of that, which unfortunately you can't see on the other side, was a guy holding up, the MVP trophy. So it's this idea that you either go this way or this way. And these were based on drawings made by one of the kids that I collaborated with. And then on the floor, you have these two life-size figures, one sort of a homeless man in a box. And again, part of this collaboration experience is talking to the kids and hearing their ideas and hearing their take based on these perceptions and misperceptions. And then my personal favorite moment is this quote. I'll let you have a read of that. So James did this, and he said, "This is what I'm going to put on the wall." And I was like, "Oh, James." I was like, "I don't know, really?" He's like, "Listen." Now keep in mind, this is a 13-year-old boy. He goes, "Listen, this is for those of you that don't remember Latrell Sprewell. He was a player back in the day, a professional player, and he literally choked his coach during a game and got in trouble. But because he was so good, they made exception to the rule." And James said to me, he's like, "I don't like Latrell Sprewell. I think he's a jerk." He goes, "But people think I like him. People want me to have him as their role model." He goes, "So I'm going to play with the audience. I'm going to tell them what they want to hear." And I thought, oh my goodness, this kid is so smart. He's so astute, and he's 13. So it became like this little inside joke between he and I. And this was the piece in the show, this little bit of text that people would go, oh, did you see what that kid wrote? Oh my goodness. So I share that with you. So this experience, myself sort of knowing Gino and doing the show led to a whole body of work called the Kids That Kill Kids series. And this is the first piece in that series. And what you're seeing here is ceramic tiles, 270 of them, and they construct the image of a person. This face is a young boy, also from Georgia, who was wrestling with his friend, and his friend killed him by accident, and his friend was incarcerated. And then on the wall, you see text, and it's basically taking you from the first day of this violent death all the way to years later, and it's a perspective of someone who lost a child. So it's basically like their journal entries over this time span. So you see that, one, the long process of grief, where people don't get over things right away. Loss is forever, and a mother, say for example, who loses their child, they don't heal and go on. It mends, but there's forever that scar. The brass plaques on the wall, because remember, this is also the same time as Columbine. And if I ask you right now, you all probably know the names of the two killers, the two young men from Columbine. Anyone know, just by hands, who the guys were in Columbine? Really? You guys? Oh my God, I can't believe this. Really, only like 2 or 3 of you?
And one is your friend.
Well, of course Rebecca would know.
Yeah.
Of course she knows. Wow, that's really interesting. Because everyone knew their names, but nobody knew the names of the victims.
Right, it's because we're old.
It's because we're old.
They're too young.
Yeah, I know. I got gray hair now. Anyhow, so I was really interested at that time in what the media was talking about and what the media was presenting. And that's why this piece is called What's Not Covered, because it's about the stories, the personal loss, and what happens after the violence occurs and that longevity. So what I did was, on the brass plaques were the names of all kids that were killed by other kids, and I did not acknowledge the names of their killers, so that the attention would be shifted. So as I mentioned before, Gino was the boy that I knew, so I give his name recognition. And then the text sort of changes as you go around. In the beginning, it starts off, it's a little more angry and intense, and then as you shift through, you see the different stages that someone goes through as they're processing that loss. So now that I've mentioned Rebecca, my friend Rebecca, who is here, is an investigator with death row inmates, and we had a conversation. And it was about, like, how can you talk about violence, and how can you talk about this topic of kids that kill kids and show a different perspective on it? Like, can you humanize the perpetuators of violence as well? And so that led me to this piece. And here what I've done is I've painted the killers and the victims, and I've treated them the same. So they're all very, very whitewashed. And this piece, in real life, it's actually quite difficult to see the portraits. I've adjusted it a bit on here so that you can see it. And then what you have are two text panels. And the text panels are both from the point of view of a mother. And it's the mother of a child who was murdered and a mother of a child who did the murdering. They were not directly related. And I'm going to let you read the two panels. So for me, this piece it's the universality of loss, and that here are these two people that are intimately connected, and they're both dealing with these struggles, and here are these kids, right? And because they're whitewashed, when the viewer goes up and sees them, because this is the second level of the piece, it's about stereotyping and typecasting. So immediately after these incidents occur, you tend to look and you go, oh, that person, he must have been the killer, or that one, you know, man, he was wearing a trench coat, he's a bad dude, right? So this thing after Columbine happened, where all of a sudden anyone that was a little bit eccentric was deemed problematic. And then in Atlanta, of course, at the time, it was also very much about race and dealing with urban violence, where if you're a person of color, you're seen as more of a threat than someone who is not. And we know situations now, as you know, this was 2002, and of course it continues to happen in our country with these school shootings. And overwhelmingly, it tends to be not individuals of color where they go in and do mass shootings. It tends to be almost exclusively men, and it tends to be almost exclusively white men. But I won't get on my pulpit about guns and gun control right now. So I did this piece, and then I decided I would get a little snarky, and I decided to employ some dark humor, and I made Kids That Kill Kids commemorative stamps. Because basically, we as a society have such a hard time talking about violence and trauma and how do we deal with it. We like to hide and push things away. So I thought, well, we have all these memorial stamps, commemorative stamps for things. We honor, World War II. We honor, great individuals. At the time when I made this piece, it was the same time that the Andy Warhol commemorative stamp came out. And I started thinking about Warhol and this notion of celebrity and how celebrity factors in as well to this love of violence and kids involved in the act of school shooting. And I borrowed the composition for the Warhol stamp. So I actually totally scanned in the stamp, picked up the green, borrowed the font, and I decided I was going to make my own little commemorative stamps. And so this piece here is very important because this was my first composite. This space does not exist. He is made by layering together kids that have killed other kids. And then on top, I have the text of all these kids that have killed other kids. And here you have sort of the Brady Bunch, right? Again, I'm dating myself, but for those that are closer to my age, we remember the Brady Bunch, right? And here we have our Brady Bunch of killers, and then you have the sort of the a la Michael Jordan. Again, dating myself. God, I'm feeling really old here. All these, I feel like I should say LeBron James, but that was not my cultural reference at that point. But the silhouette on the top. So I did a whole bunch of these. There were I think the first series there were maybe 9 of them, and they were all framed. And one of my favorite stories, I go to the frame shop to pick up the pieces, and this lady's like, "Oh my God, those are so beautiful." I was like, "Oh." No one ever, first of all, let me tell you, no one ever says my work is beautiful. And so she's like, "Have you thought about marketing these at Crate and Barrel?" And I was like, did you look at what's going on in there? She's like, "They're adorable. I love them." I'm like, wow, I could totally do a sneak attack. No one would even know what I was doing. I could get all these images into Crate and Barrel. Of course, I never really did it. But I thought that was quite interesting how you can use elements of graphic design and be quite clever and sort of sneak pieces in ways that other people aren't expecting. So then I thought, well, I'm all done with that. I'm going to move on to another body of work. And then Virginia Tech happened. So I revisited the stamp. So I have 2 editions. I have the 2003 edition, and I have the 2007 edition. And I felt like when I got to the 2007 edition, I had been thinking about my work in a different way, and I had decided at that point that I didn't want to showcase anyone else by putting their images on the stamps that had been that had perpetuated the violence. So essentially the killers. I didn't want to give them face time. So for that particular series, I tried to flip it around and show the victims more. I'm not sure one is better than the other, but it was commemorative stamps on that end. And when they are actually stamp size. So when you see them, they're printed out. They're very, very small. And I'm considering exhibiting them at the gallery. So you may see these in real life. All right. So now I'm going to sort of segue into something that I consider more of a personal body of work. And I am interested in digital art. I'm interested in photography. I draw. I make prints. I've done like everything, performance and sculpture, and sometimes I dabble into installation, but I'm like stuck to the walls, right? As 2D artists that we try and do installation, it's like, yeah, do you see I've activated the space? No, the wall, right? So these are digital prints. There are 6 in the series, and they're based on photographs. They're from my own photographs from my own sort of personal library. And you'll see some carryover here with the idea of days and counting. So here, this whole piece is about loss, and it's about memory. And it's about how over time, when you lose someone, it's sort of like there's 2 levels of loss. So there's the initial loss when somebody dies, and you have that grief, and then what I call the second loss, when you can no longer recall them. Right? When you lose the memory, when things become like you're grabbing at fog, you're grabbing at air. And so this is what this series is about. And so what happens with the pieces, you sort of have this up close and this stepping back. So when you get up really close to the piece, you can see the massive amounts of time. And then when you step back, the figures start to come into the frame. So here you see just this, and this piece is quite large. It's about the length of the screen here, and maybe about 3.5 feet tall. And you sort of, and some of the images are actually life-size, so you're encountering the figures in actual scale. So, but you have that whole, like you're trying to hold on to something that you no longer have control of. This one is called The Kiss Goodbye, and so here you see the person sort of essentially mugging for the camera, blowing me a kiss. And, so here we have every minute of the day counted out, and each day essentially represents a year. So in this instance, it was for what would have been the equivalent of 12 years, I believe. And this one is printed out life-size. So when you encounter it in the gallery, you're actually standing face-to-face with the person. So tomorrow, I might forget, again, the figures are printed out life-size. And here, strips of paper are cut, and there's essentially like trying to stop a waterfall. So this is what I was doing here. So the cascading strips are like echoing water, and it's frozen in time. And if you flip the strips back up, the image becomes whole. But the idea is, things are fragmenting, things are disappearing and vanishing. And so this one here, the figures are slightly larger than life, and the idea behind this is thinking about the Vietnam Memorial and this idea of going up to something that is dark, and you're trying to, you find the names on there. So in this instance, you're just seeing dates. And it's like how, again, as a way of marking time. So not every day is a good day, every day is a bad day, but they're days. And you just go through and you sort of, just simply mark time. And the pictures are essentially, they're snapshots. They're meant to be pictures. I mean, they were snapshots. They were fun. They're fun moments and fun memories, and they're supposed to be universal, so that every viewer can connect. They can look and like, oh, I have pictures like that with your friends. And then this is sort of my big fantasy. Someday this becomes a billboard, right? I'm like, it wouldn't be like me and Felix Gonzalez Torres, right? We've got these billboards. And so here you just have these 2 figures sort of running off into the woods. And then on the surface, even though you can't see it, but these little lines are just Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, counted out sequentially. And then the last one, this one is quite interesting because this you'll see this idea of coming into play in a later piece. And this is where the title of the show came from, White Dandelions. So it's this idea of you blow a dandelion, right, those white dandelions, and they sort of disperse and they go everywhere. So here the dandelion is sort of being blown across, but it's cut. So all these are holes that are cut, and they're on the floor, and they're sort of accumulating. So you have lots to little, and as it goes, it'll sort of blow on the whole thing, and the image disappears. All right, how are we doing? We're doing okay? Maybe that was for me. I need to get a bit more. All right, so now we're going to segue into some more present work, the composite. So this one is still based on, if you think back to the stamp image, here we have, this is a composite of killers, and this is a composite of victims. So on top is 75 names, both killers and victims combined. So I just started constructing them, merging together all these different faces. All the faces were found online on the internet, so these are all essentially photos that have been published in newspapers or published on sites where you could gather that information. And so now what you're seeing this is a totally new constructed person, prototype of what a killer looks like, someone who kills other kids, and a prototype of what a victim looks like. Some people have asked me about the slight turning. A lot of the killers are mugshots, and that's why you tend to have straight-on images. And a lot of the victims are yearbook photos, which often in yearbook photos you get that slightly, three-quarter view. So that composite segued into, these are two more composites. This one's pretty recent. I just threw it up kind of for fun. Death row is not terribly fun. But I used to work at Rutgers University, and I was there when Tyler Clementi committed suicide. So he was a young man who was bullied because he was gay. And when I was there, and I was talking to my students about it, and I said this the other day in Michael's class, I was really struck by their disconnect. They're like, we didn't know. I said, what? I mean, this is happening right here, right now on our campus. And they were just like, I don't care. I'm like, so we have the national spotlight on us, and you guys don't want to do anything about it? So I got a little mad, and we had to make this big art piece and do this project. And I was like, I'll give you a choice. You can do it or not. And they were like, do we really have a choice? I'm like, no, you really don't. And so anyhow, I'm actually not showing you the project we did. It was really cool. We did a suite of prints. But this piece ended up leading into another piece. And this is a recent composite where these faces, these are all individuals on death row in Texas that were executed last year. And there was actually one woman, so it was not all men. And Texas last year in this was 2013 where I got the images. 39 individuals in this country were executed, and the text on top are their last words. And that's sort of another funny thing, like why do we pay attention to their last words? Why is that a novelty? Why don't we pay attention to their lives? Why don't we pay attention to who they are and their existence? I know right now prison and prison life is getting attention because of the TV show Orange is the New Black. And we're now thinking about things and considering things in a different way, so I sort of give the TV show a little snap for calling our eyes to look there. But to go back to the Tyler Clementi piece, that sort of prompted me to make this image. It's interesting because as artists we make work, and sometimes there are pieces you make, you're like, oh, it's pretty good, another piece you're like, well, that wasn't so bad. This is one I'm still really, I'm really proud of. It was one that I feel like was pretty successful. So these are, about, not quite 4 feet across by maybe about 6 feet down, so they're pretty large in scale. And this is 50 boys and 50 girls that committed suicide because they were bullied. And I tried initially to find one from every state, but I couldn't do that. And the text is all excised, so it means it's all cut out. So I hand cut all the letters, and they're on the floor. So when the piece is lit, you can actually see, and that's a little bit of what you're seeing here, is the light shining through, so you see the void where the names initially were. Most of the boys that were bullied because they were either gay, or the bullying tactic used was implying that they were gay. And And most of the girls that were bullied, the bullying tactic was implying that they were sluts. So these are the two universal things. You'll see ages on there. I think the youngest is 8, all the way up to 18. And again, this is a topic that very happy that we're having conversations about and people are actively trying to engage in. And I know as a parent, I deal with bullying, and it's very difficult on both ends. Children being bullied and your child being the bullier. So, and I will also point out, this is not something, this affects everyone. Everyone, regardless of their demographic, regardless of their socioeconomic status, regardless of their race, it's just there. And it's really interesting. I'm like doing this stuff, and it's tough. It's like overwhelming to be in this world, and you're reading this stuff, and you're thinking about it. Sometimes I have to take a break. I'm only showing you the serious work, but there are like little funny pieces as well, because you can't just be in this place all the time. You have to have levity. Here's the detail shot, so you can see the letters all hand cut. Man, I gotta tell you, that's hard. Someone's like, why don't you use a laser cutter? I'm like, no, it has to be hand cut. And like, I'm there on top of it, and it would take me, like 45 minutes to do one name. I hated the letter G's. I'm like, why did I do G's like that? They were so hard to hand cut. And I was so excited. And I'm no joke, I did not make a mistake. And then I hired this person to come in and help me. And the first letter she cut it wrong. I was like, I'm going to have to fire you. I didn't fire her. That would be cruel. But she did realize after like 4 letters, she's like, I can't do this. Okay. So I'm going to just jump into it as a collaboration. I know time is going to be a factor, so I want to make sure I can get everything done. I worked at America's Camp. America's Camp was a place that existed for 10 years. And it was for children who lost parents on 9/11, or if you lost a parent or guardian, if your parent or guardian was a firefighter or police officer from the New York area. And I'm so happy my good friend Bruce St. Thomas is here in the back. I met Bruce at America's Camp. We instantly became buddies, and Bruce helped me pretty much on every single project. He was there. We worked together. And Bruce is also the reason why I'm here, because I met Bruce, and then after meeting Bruce, I met Marie, and I met the Center for Grieving Children, and that's the glue in this equation. So this is the very first project. I went to America's Camp, and I didn't know anybody. Like, I knew nobody. I just kind of lucked out that I got there. And I remember the first day I'm walking up the hill, and I meet Bruce, and folks from the center had this idea to make a quilt, and I'm like, I got an idea to make a quilt. Let's work together. So we worked together, and this is how we work. This is how you collaborate. You start talking, you start networking, you listen to what everyone else is thinking about, and you work cooperatively. And I will tell you that America's Camp was truly one of the most amazing experiences of my life. This is the only place, and this is true, the only place where I've ever had my, your skin crawl, like goosebumps, from pure joy. And every year I would be there. Every time there'd be like some moment where I'm like, oh my God, you just feel that you just are so overwhelmed by the love and the joy. And you don't think that it's going to happen. You think, oh my God, this place will be the saddest place in the world. And it wasn't. And it was really like you're witnessing the best of humanity. People came from all over the world and volunteered their time. And I volunteered. All these projects that you're seeing, I did for free. This was volunteer. Lots of times I get, well, most of the time, you get paid for your work. But there are some times where you do things that are bigger than that. So this is our quilt. This is a 5 by 35 foot structure. Now, I will tell you, when you decide to make a quilt, you probably should know how to sew. I don't know how to sew. So, the last night we're like trying to sew, and none of us are doing a good job, and that was a bad idea. So then I went back with all these squares, and I'm like, what the heck am I going to do with this? So I turned them all into iron-on patches. Right? So here I am in my little teeny tiny studio trying to iron these patches on the quilt, and it worked really well. And now the quilt exists, and it has since been stitched by professional seamstress who did it all for free. And I will also let you know all of the pieces that were made at America's Camp are part of the permanent collection at the National September 11th Memorial Museum, which is really cool. So someday you'll be able to go down there and you can see the work. Here are some of the squares on the piece. As you'll probably notice some changes from the first year up till the 5th year, and I'll just ask you to sort of look and see if you could see shifts in the imagery and what you notice. I will tell you, it's always very powerful for me to talk about this work in front of a community. You guys, the students, are the ages of some of these kids. So I know, like, I look at this guy's name, I know Sean. Sean's in college. He's your age. So I met Sean when he was a little boy, and now he's in college. This girl just graduated from college last year, right? So it's like you have this gift of being able to work with these children when they're young, and then some of them I'm still in touch with, and I get to see them now as young adults, and they're just amazing, amazing individuals, and they've done so well for themselves just to be like doing things. So the last day of camp, they got the quilt set out, our little makeshift quilt, and this young woman came up to me and she's whispering into my ear and she's like, "Traci, I want to show you my square." I'm like, "Okay." So she gets down on top of my back and she's like, "That's my dad. He's a star in the night sky. I want you to remember him when you look up in the night sky." And I said, "Okay." And at that moment, I'm like, "Okay, I've got to come back. I've got to do a project the next year." And I decided the next year it was going to be based on the nighttime sky. And so much of what you do when you collaborate is listen, right? So it's listening, and every year the kids would sort of guide me in a direction that I was supposed to go. I never knew what I was going to be doing, and then the following, something would happen during the week. I'm like, "Oh, that's what we're going to do next." So this is the idea. I mean, my initial idea was we were going to make constellations, and it was going to actually kind of look like a sky. But the kids had to make big pieces, and this is 8 by 20 foot mural, so this is pretty big, right? And they wanted it bigger, and I'm like, "Oh my God!" So it looks like someone sneezed and like blew all their images on there, so there's no constellation or anything. And down at the bottom we have a very small ground line. And all I did on this one is I just basically painted the background. I painted the night sky, and then they created all the stars for it. And here you can see some of the kids working on their pieces. And we had the quilt laid out in the background, so they had that as a touchstone. Yeah, so it's also really interesting for me, because I remember these pieces, I remember moments, I remember conversations, and it's a struggle between what are these intimate moments that someone talks to you about, stories that they share, and what do I then share publicly. So, I'll sort of let you look with your own conclusions. I will tell you that on this piece, here, when the young boy made it, I said, "Oh, that's great, Kyler, we're going to put it on the piece, blah, blah, blah." He's like, "No, I need it." And I was like, "Well, yeah, but, we're making this piece, and we're supposed to, put it down." And he's like, "But I need it." And so we struck a deal that I could copy the piece exactly, and I will put the copy down, and he needs to hold the original. And it was at that moment that I realized we had to make multiples, because the kids need ownership. These pieces were so much bigger. So much was going into each individual piece, even though they may not look that complicated. There's an intensity of emotion, an intensity of honor that were going into them that they needed to keep them. So the following year I went back and we did a printmaking project, and this is sort of the final incarnation of the piece. The idea was based on postcards. You write postcards home when when you go to camp, and here the kids were going to write a postcard to the person that they lost. I will say that this was a tough piece. The messages were very private and they were personal and they were not read. The kids did them, and they were all attached to these hot air balloons, balloons that were filled with helium. And we all assembled around camp the last night, so you can see it's a good amount of people. And we had these guys from New Zealand. They did this tribal dance called the haka, right? It's a Maori chant. Whoa, they do their thing. And then we had to let go of the balloons, but no one wanted to let go. Because why would you want to let go? It's this symbolism of that. So eventually the strings had to be cut, and the postcards had to be released, and they're sort of echoing these Buddhist prayer scrolls or kite tails. So 2 balloons take off, and of course you see the symbolism here of the 2 long skinny structures. And here's me, I'm like organizing the whole piece, and there's this one balloon that's kind of like hovering, that doesn't want to go, and I'm panicking, going, "Oh my God, go," but I'm being cool, so it's kind of right? And it stays. Now keep in mind, we were at like, 175 kids and, probably 100 plus staff, and nobody's, sorry, that's my folks, letting me know it loves me. And nobody's moving, and nobody's talking. And eventually the wind sort of catches up and then it goes away. And everyone stood there on the lawn until the balloons were completely out of sight, until they were like little dots. And we're talking little kids all the way up to adults just stood there and watched it. It was so beautiful and powerful, and it's like a site-specific performance/installation that if you were there, you got to experience it. And I can tell you these stories, right? And that's how it exists. 2 weeks later, I get a phone call. Oh, Traci, guess what? One of the balloons landed. I'm like, what? Somebody found one. Now, we were in upstate Massachusetts on the Vermont-New York border. Balloon lands on the Connecticut-New York border on the way back to Manhattan. I was like, oh my goodness, it traveled. First of all, that even went in that direction back to New York City. That's overwhelming. It landed on a volunteer firefighter's lawn. I'm just, wow. So that becomes now part of the story. Of course, we decided not to get it because I didn't want the kids to think that their notes weren't, if they came back down, then maybe their parents sent it back down. We didn't want that, so we just let it be that story. And I never told them which balloon came back. So then the following year, so one of the girls, young girl, that year made an image of a phoenix. We were talking about the phoenix, and I said, why are you making a phoenix? And she said, well, the phoenix lives forever. It never dies. And I thought, all right, we're going to build a phoenix. Remember, installations stuck to the wall. I don't know how to build. What am I going to do? Oh, my God. We built a phoenix. So this is a 20 by 15 by 8 foot structure. I had some people help me figure out the armature. Every feather underneath was created by a child, and it's a symbol of honor. So who is the person you wish to honor? And on the top were all the feathers made by the support staff, the counselors, and everyone that worked at America's Camp. And then this gives you a sense of scale. Yeah, it was pretty huge. And there's me, a little bit younger, without glasses on. And then the background on the floor, you can kind of see the mural. My brother told me the phoenix looks like it's in drag. So here's sort of the magical thing about the phoenix is it glows in the dark. And, the eyes glow and all the feathers glow. So we bought this, super toxic, expensive glow-in-the-dark paint that really, literally almost made me pass out. I did walk into a wall at one point. But on the last night of camp, and I will tell you in my life, first of all, this is the only time I've made something where I said it was beautiful. Like I walked in, and the piece was all lit up, and it was all by itself, and I was like, oh my God, it's beautiful. Like it was so beautiful. And it was like this glowing little gem. And it's very hard to describe, but it was probably never in my life will I have an art experience as awesome as the night that the Phoenix went up. It was so cool. And when you have your art piece with your target audience, and they didn't know it was going to glow in the dark, like only a couple people knew, and we had the whole piece, and I did my whole talk, and the lights cut out, and the piece is glowing, and they were raising it up, and you just, oh my God, and you're just hearing like, these collective gasps from everyone, and you're just feeling it. You feel that in that space. It's phenomenal, and it's tough. I mean, these kids' pieces are sometimes very, very difficult. This piece to me, if you ask me what this is America's Camp. This is like the piece that this one girl made this piece, and she said to me, I want you to show me how to draw a man's body. And so I drew it on the paper, and she's like, okay. She goes, will you write a man somewhere he shouldn't be? So I wrote that, and then she copied it. And she said, okay, Traci, show me how to make him disappear. Sorry, I'll get a little emotional, but so then we had to put water on and make him go away. And that's her dad. And I know this girl. This girl is one of my favorite kids at camp. And I'm so proud. She was like, she's in art school now. She's you. She is exactly you. And she's in art school in New York, and she's doing it, and this is like, when I first met her, she was like, I kind of like art, but I don't know. And then she did this. I'm like, oh my goodness. And this little boy over here, he told me after he did this piece, he goes, I heard a rumor that a plane flew into a building, and I think that's how my dad died, but I don't know. So I'm going to draw a picture of the plane crashing into the building. So some kids, depending on their age, they don't have this level of understanding. And then the girl with this one here, and these two buddies, and it's her dad playing airplane with her as a child. And so here's just a couple more. Sometimes it's nice to see some of the individual pieces. And so the last year, I was on this mythology kick, and so the last year we made Pandora's Lantern, and poor Pandora, she gets the worst rap, right? She's like, oh, Pandora, she releases all the evils on the world. But for those of you that understand a little bit about mythology, once Pandora released all the evils, she closed the box, and the only thing left inside was hope. So then Zeus goes back to Pandora and says, you must give the world hope, or else we cannot survive. So this is about hope, and this was our last year. And hopefully maybe some of you have noticed how the colors have shifted over the 5 years, and the artwork has changed. And as the kids were at camp and they were growing and they were processing their grief in this sort of collective community, we were witnessing this transition. So this piece is about 9 by 9 by 8 feet. As I am not a mathematical person, I had calculated the circumference, and I apparently did something wrong. I forgot to add in the 2 inches. So my poor little engineer friend who was helping me, he's like, oh my God, Tracy, we didn't add these measurements. Will that make a difference? Yes. So then we turned it into an accordion background instead of a circular lantern. It worked. It worked perfectly. Things at America's Camp work it was like miracles left and right. I'm hoping the same is going to be true for my collaboration with the Center for Grieving Children. We're going to have disasters along the way, snow days left and right, and it's going to work. So this piece emanates sound. So you hear the children say who their mom or dad's name was and what they hope for. And it emanates light. And the idea is Pandora was created by 3 gods giving gifts. Hermes was the gift of persuasion, so the sound is the hope that, or the viewers, or the kids hope that everyone else is persuaded by the beauty, and they find hope. Athena? I'm doing terrible. Well, Apollo was the gift of sound, and that's why we chose to have sound. I think Athena was the gift of beauty, so the image was, and then Hermes was the gift of persuasion. And here's a couple of detailed shots. This one on the end, the young boy hoping to be able to stand in the footsteps of his father's shadow someday. And this one, this child, every time the family found a dime, this was a symbol from their dad. So this is the dad flying across the fiery sky as an eagle holding a dime, sort of carrying that.
Tracy, it's 12:55.
Oh my goodness, I better go really fast now. All right, so then here's some stuff here, and we'll just zip through in the last 5 minutes. So before 9/11, I made this piece like most people do. We were trying to process this intensity of the loss. So I painted 10% of the people that died on that day. I didn't know anybody. I just randomly painted these small portraits in gray to symbolize the ash. And then after I started working at America's Camp, I realized, holy crap, I painted some of my kids' parents. And so the piece took on this different twist. So then I did this piece, which was my way of sort of processing my experiences at America's Camp. Because I was living in Brooklyn at the time, and where I lived, if you walked out my front door and you looked this way, that was ground zero. Except you actually had to be on the roof to see it, because I lived in Brooklyn. So there was this gap, this void in the sky, basically this empty space, which was where the Twin Towers stood. So I would go out every morning and I would take a photo of this emptiness in space, and this became a series of postcards. And the names of the kids were on the top of the postcard, and it was a way of signifying their loss. And then you would take the postcard, just like you want a souvenir from New York. You take the postcard, and underneath the postcard was the name of their parent that was deceased. So the piece changes over time. So once the postcards are all removed, it becomes this an empty wall with just names written on it. Oh my gosh, I'm not sure. I'm going to have to go really fast. Okay, so I run a program in the Bronx. I teach people, teach kids, I teach teachers. Sort of parallel to what I do. I talk too much about America's Camp. I got all excited. Sorry. Do you guys care if I go 5 minutes over? Carolyn, is that okay?
Well, some of them might have to catch a bus at 1:15. That's the last bus out.
Okay, all right, then I'll go really fast. All right, so this is what I do. This is my project. I've been in the Bronx for 11 years. Basically have worked to transform school and education practices. I work with non-artists. I work with humanities teachers, English and social studies teachers, And we use arts integration so that the kids can better understand the curriculum. So these are our stained glass windows based on the Crusades and Macbeth. These are, this is a very poor school. This is a very poor part of New York. It is the poorest county in New York State and probably one of the poorest counties in the whole country. So we're doing printmaking. We don't have anything. We don't have the sink. We don't have all these things, but we make it work. So here I'm teaching them printmaking. They're doing these portrait projects. Basically, it's Elmer's glue on watercolor paper. So we make the matrix and then we create prints. That led me to this series. I'm so sorry, I'm shortchanging this work. So I started doing these gouache paintings. These are 22 by 30, based on my students and sort of doing these black and white images, and then on top will be color. And then that led to this series. These are monoprints. These are all 15 by 20. This was based, my kids are essentially Trayvon Martin. They're Michael Brown. They're Tamir Rice. They're any person of color that deals with stereotypes, violence, misconceptions. So these are just black and white prints, and then on top I play in the land of color. So here are a couple of them, detail images. This is two more from the series. These two were made. This is more about I can't remember, Gentile, I can't remember her last name, the young woman who spoke on the stand during the Trayvon Martin trial, and how the media sort of was all over her because she didn't have proper English. So those two pieces are about that. And then that leads me to my current collaborations. This was in Portsmouth, Ohio, a very impoverished community on the Ohio-Kentucky border. I did a large collaboration there last year. So these are kids and that's the bridge that connects Kentucky to Ohio. Portsmouth, if you go to Wikipedia or you Google it, it says when the town was established, and the next thing it says, it's the OxyContin crystal meth capital of Ohio, and it just goes on about all this negative stuff. I'm like, my God, imagine if that's your identity. So these kids are very marked by their location. And so we did something similar to what we're going to be doing with the center. I did these are lithos and silkscreens, so the kids created all the patterning that goes on top, and then I just did the portraits. So we're going to be doing something similar with the adolescent refugees from the Center for Grieving Children, and I'll be doing their portraits, the black and white images, and they'll be constructing the background colors. And then we also did, in Ohio, my first I Am, I Will, I'm Afraid. And this person is all the kids combined together, and we're making a prototype from there. So this is the first time I'm using live models instead of found imagery. And then the text is all written by the kids. So it's their response to the prompts, I am, I will, I'm afraid. And then over here, you can see the piece was 12 by 16 feet, and you get a sense of Portsmouth. Didn't have as much snow as we have here, but that was March, so they have a lot of snow too. So that piece went public in March. They liked it so much, it was supposed to be down in June. They liked it so much, they took it down this December, so that was really cool for me. The community was really empowered by the piece. Then I went to Appleton, which is Wisconsin, and I worked with LGBTQ youth. This is the first time I worked specifically with, I've worked with gay youth before, but specifically that target demographic to do a piece. And here's our project. So this is their I Am, I Will, I'm Afraid. Sort of a neat little coincidence as we were determining the pose. They struck this pose, and I'm like, wow, it's kind of like Saint Sebastian, who is sort of the martyr saint for, he's a gay, he was one of the first gay icons. And then here's the piece installed, and here you can see downtown Wisconsin in the background. And then I went to Iowa City this summer, and I worked with youth there, and they're like, well, what are you going to call us? I'm like, what do you mean what am I going to call you? She goes, well, they're like, well, how are you going to label us? I'm like, well, you tell me, how do you want to be labeled? I'm like, I don't label people, you come to me and you tell me. So they're like, okay, well, we're outliers. And I'm like, okay. And they truly were. They're like a little bit fringe, and they were kids that didn't fit in elsewhere in Iowa City. This piece is going public this spring, so I can show it to you, but it is not in existence yet outside of my computer. And that's it. I did it. Yay.